A Spanish galleon sank in 1622, carrying more wealth than most nations owned. And it took 350 years and $20 million to find. The conventional story is tidy. A hurricane sinks a treasure ship, the gold and silver vanish into the Atlantic and nobody recovers it. Case closed, except that's not what happened. In 1985, a salvage crew found the Nuestra Señora de Atocha off the Florida Keys, and what they pulled up wasn't just a wreck. It was an economics lesson written in Spanish colonial currency, and the lesson wasn't about luck. It was about incentives. The Atocha left Cartagena in September 1622 loaded with silver from the Potosi mines, the richest silver deposit on Earth at that moment. The cargo was worth roughly $400 million in today's money. Adjusted for purchasing power, closer to $2 billion. A single ship. That's not hyperbole. That's what the Spanish crown was actually moving across the Atlantic in a wooden hull. Here's where the first layer of logic breaks down. If the wreck was so valuable, why didn't the Spanish find it immediately? They had the maps, the coordinates, the knowledge of where the ship went down. The answer: they tried, for decades, and they failed. Not because they were incompetent, but because the ocean was harder than anyone expected. By the 1700s, the wreck was forgotten, technically lost. Salvage technology didn't exist, diving bells were experimental toys, not tools. The cost of even attempting a recovery far exceeded what anyone could finance. So the Atocha sat on the seafloor for 350 years, slowly being buried under sand and coral. History moved on. This is the part where most versions of the story end. But in 1969, a man named Mel Fisher decided to change the equation. Fisher was a salvage entrepreneur, not a historian, not a romantic, a businessman. He looked at the Atocha problem and saw something nobody else did. Modern diving technology had finally made recovery possible. The question wasn't should we find it, the question was, who gets paid if we do? Fisher invested $20 million over 16 years. His son died in a diving accident, his wife died at sea. The operation hemorrhaged money while competitors laughed. By 1984, he was broke, litigated, and operating on fumes. Nobody in this story is stupid, look at what they were doing anyway. Fisher had discovered something more valuable than the silver itself: salvage rights. Spanish law said whoever found the wreck owned it. On July 20, 1985, Fisher's divers found the anchor, then the cannons, then the silver, stacks of it, coins called pieces of 8, the actual currency that funded the early global economy. The recovery took months. When the final tally came in, they'd pulled up 40 tons of precious metals and artifacts. The wreck was real. The value was real. Fisher's gamble had paid off. Here's where the real story starts. Fisher didn't own the silver outright. Spanish law said the crown had rights. The state of Florida claimed jurisdiction. The federal government wanted a cut. Suddenly, the wreck became a courtroom. For years, Fisher fought and won most of those battles, but the legal fees consumed millions. The treasure was found, but the incentive structure around it was still being written. When the dust settled, Fisher's company owned the salvage. He sold portions to collectors and museums. Some coins went to the Smithsonian, others sold at auction for thousands each. A single piece of 8, minted in 1621, pulled from the seafloor in 1985, could fetch $30,000 today. Not because the metal was worth that, because the story was. This is the real lesson buried in the Atocha story. The wreck was always there. The silver was always there. What changed was technology, incentives, and the legal framework that said if you risk enough to find it, you get to keep it. Fisher didn't discover a treasure. He discovered a profitable property right. That's what made the recovery rational. The Atocha wasn't unique. Dozens of wrecks sit on ocean floors worldwide. Some are probably worth more than the Atocha. None have been recovered because the incentive structure around them doesn't work yet. The technology exists. The divers exist. What doesn't exist is a clear answer to the question, who gets paid? Without that answer, the treasure stays underwater. The pieces of 8 themselves tell another story. They were the first truly global currency, minted in Spanish colonies, traded in China, used in early America. The Atocha was carrying the financial infrastructure of an emerging world economy. When those coins were recovered, they weren't just artifacts. They were evidence of how wealth actually moves through the world. Modern treasure hunting operates on the same principle. When someone announces they've found a wreck or a cache, the first question isn't how much is it worth. It's who owns it. Salvage law, maritime law, national sovereignty, these aren't obstacles to recovery. They're the reason recovery happens at all. Clear property rights make risky investments rational. Fisher died in 1998, worth millions. His company continues operating. The Atocha artifacts are in museums and private collections worldwide. The silver that once funded empires is now dispersed across the globe in pieces. Each coin carries the story of a wreck, a gamble, and a legal framework that made the gamble worth taking. The real wealth in the Atocha story wasn't the silver. It was the insight that if you change the incentives, you change what's possible. For 350 years, the treasure was worthless because nobody could claim it. The moment property rights were clarified, it became valuable again. That's not luck, that's economics. Today, the wreck is a museum site. Divers visit it as a historical landmark. The coins are studied by numismatists and historians. The story has been written and rewritten, but the underlying principle remains: value isn't inherent. It's created by the systems we build around scarcity, risk, and property. The Atocha proves it. The wreck sits 40 feet down in the Atlantic. The silver is mostly gone now, distributed across the world, but the lesson remains accessible. Every time a property right is clarified, every time incentives align, something that was impossible becomes inevitable. The Atocha took 350 years to surface. The next wreck might take less time, not because we're smarter, but because we've learned what makes recovery rational. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe for more stories about how incentives reshape history. There's a new case every week. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.